So the other part of this response that I got as a response to Christian agnosticism was the idea that the phrase itself kind of disregards. So the idea, the suggestion that was made was that it's all well and good that, I can say that I'm a part of Christian community and I live by Christian values, but I'm an agnostic. The idea was that it sort of disregards in the title itself the connection to the identity of the person, the deity of the person of Christ. And actually, this precisely gets at the whole point of Christian agnosticism. So this is kind of an assumption of a definition. Now, first of all, we would have to come to terms with what do we mean by deity. So there's plenty in the Bible, for example, like I think Colossians 2:9 is an example of a passage that says something like, in him, in Christ, was the fullest of deity, or something like this. And first of all, that doesn't necessarily mean that Christ was a deity or God. So Christ having the fullest of deity could mean that Christ was of a character or of a nature that was so divine as to be like God. And even the title Son of God is not a phrase that was unique to Jesus, right? It was something that was, the Caesar was called the Son of God. And so to call Jesus the Son of God had cultural implications, political implications. It was a way of regarding the authority of Jesus over others. And so point being is that the language of the Bible so often is just a way of trying to communicate and articulate things that are just very difficult to understand, very difficult to explain. So there's that. First of all, the what is it that the authors of the Bible or the followers of Jesus actually meant when they said things that Jesus was like God? Now, this is not a new idea, right? This is something that has been around from the very beginning. I mean, that's the idea of the doctrine of the Trinity emerged out of this discussion when Arius said certain things about the nature of Jesus, that Jesus was created by God, that Jesus was essentially divine but not God. And so this discussion has been going for a long, long time. And sure, the response here is, well, Arius was excommunicated from the church, right? Considered a heretic. Well, that's a decision that was made by humans, by a community of people, but it wasn't a universally agreed upon idea. So in any case, that's a discussion that still occurs today. What do the authors or the disciples, the followers of Jesus, what did they mean when they said these things? So that's the first thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that Jesus was God. It could be he was, had a divine character or something like this. But then there's also the idea that, well, we can't necessarily assume that the idea of Jesus being divine was correct. I mean, this is sounds like a very bold statement, but we have to remember that and this is, of course, this is going to lead into a discussion about the nature of the Bible, but the authors of the Bible and just generally the followers of Jesus, they were human beings. And so it could be another possibility is that they venerated this person, Jesus of Nazareth, to make him sound like a godlike figure because of the way that they felt about him and the things, that they believed about him. But I think of in Acts, Paul talks about how the people that they were kind of preaching to tried to make Paul and Barnabas, they tried to worship them like they were gods. And, Paul and Barnabas had to say, no, we're not gods. We're trying to point you to the one true God, etc. And so I wonder if maybe, and I'm not the first person to suggest this, it could be that this is something that the followers of Jesus did for him. They venerated him to the point that they maybe believed that he was a god or made it sound like he was a god. And this is something that happens with other people in history as well. So that's the other thing that makes us wonder, what is it that these phrases mean? Is it, are these objective ontological truths, or are they simply a result of the ideas that people have had and just the way that people in community have responded to the things that are happening in their lives. Now, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. Going back to this comment, the comment was basically suggesting that, again, since the phrase Christian, it seems to assume that the relationship to this person, and I would say that much is absolutely correct. That's exactly why I think that many people can consider themselves Christian, even if they do not necessarily believe that Jesus rose from the dead or something like that, because a Christian is, as it says in Acts, a person who is simply a member of the way, right? A little Christ, or a follower of Jesus of Nazareth, the way of Jesus of Nazareth. And so in that sense, that's why I would say, for me and for many who use this title or identify as Christian agnostic, they would say the same thing. It's a matter of following the way of Jesus of Nazareth. But that doesn't necessarily speak to these fruits. So going back to the first part of the comment, there's one, I think the connecting point here between what is inferable and what is ontologically knowable from this model that we were talking about. The connecting point is we can see from the fruits of the lives of the followers of Jesus that everything that they believed about Jesus or what they believed about God is, it points to a reality. It points to the truth that God exists, that Jesus is God, and etc. and so forth. But that's why, as I was just saying, that doesn't necessarily mean those things. The fact that there are people that were willing to die for their faith, this is something that happens all around the world for a variety of different worldviews. And so it's not necessary to say that these things are true and that God is exactly as maybe it says in the Bible, just because we've seen the fruits of this. I think that it's very clear that there are fruits of a lot of different worldviews that, kind of come out as true and have persisted for long periods of time. I mean, you've got Buddhists and Hindus who have been around for longer than Christians and Jews. And so the fruits issue, I don't think is quite enough for us to suggest that God is necessarily this ontologically unknowable object. And so I think, to summarize, the idea that Christian agnosticism doesn't take into account the relationship to Christ as a deity, sure, that is a conventional orthodoxy, but Christian agnosticism as an ideal, that takes into account the cultural and historical contexts that demonstrate that it's not necessary to come to the point that we've gotten to today in some circles, because we have to remember that this definition isn't universal. And so it's certainly possible, I believe, to consider yourself a Christian outside the bounds of what we consider modern orthodoxy.